And I didn't think at the time we'd be able to really answer this question, but until we found these plants. I mean, here are these plants that are the same age as the beginning of these calendars here in the Andes in Peru. And we have since looked around the world at this event. If you look at the Kilimanjaro ice core records, the biggest event, the only big event in the last 11,700 years, 5,200 years ago. You look at Speleothem cave records out of southern Israel. There's only one event in 13,000 years, 5,200 years ago. Look at Ötzi, the Iceman that came out of the glaciers in the Alps back in 1991. He was buried 5,200 years ago. Had to be in a rapid event, a very abrupt event that buried him, kept him buried for over 5,000 years. Otherwise, he would have decayed or he'd been eaten by the bears in that part of the world. And to me, I just saw a record out of Lake Tahoe on the California and Nevada border. There's a forest, 21 trees, about 8 feet in diameter, buried below the water surface. They drowned 5,200 years ago from the sudden rise of the water levels in that lake overflowing into Pyramid Lake. And the water level has had to stay that high for 5,000 years, otherwise those trees would have decayed. To me, it's the scale of this particular event that is most interesting. And it's particularly interesting right now because the Mayan calendar actually ends on December 21st, 2012. So you're going to see a lot of movies about 2012 becoming the end of the world. I don't believe it's the end of the world, but I do believe that there was an event that occurred 5,000 years ago, a very abrupt event that we really need to understand. It impacted climate in large parts of our planet. And 5,000 years ago, we may have had 200 million people on the planet. We now have 6.7 billion. That type of event occurring in today's world would have a tremendous economic, social impact. So I think a lot of evidence for what actually happened exists right here in the glaciers in Peru. And one of the things we'll be looking at very carefully in the new cores out of the Cordillera Blanca is this period around 5,200 years ago.
Tell me why you've chosen, you're going to 2 glaciers in the Cordillera Blanca. Why have you chosen those, and what do you hope to find there?
Well, the drilling in Peru is part of a program to look at the El Nino, the Walker Oscillation in the Pacific Ocean. This year we are drilling here in the Cordillera Blanca. Next year we'll be drilling in New Guinea, in the center of the warm pole, and when you have an El Nino, you have this warm water mass that moves along the coast of northern Peru. You get the rains in the desert. Well, in Indonesia and in New Guinea, that's where the warm water moves out of. And those areas have a drought, huge droughts. So there's a seesaw going on. And we are hoping by looking at the annual layers on this side of the Pacific and the annual layers on the other side of the Pacific to actually be able to look at how that seesaw has worked through time.
How far back do you think you'll be able to go? How far back do ice cores go? How far back do ice cores in the Andes or in Peru go?
Well, I'm more optimistic about going much further back here in the Andes because the mountains are higher, they're colder, and the ice is better preserved. I would guess we can get back maybe 20,000 years on a place like Huacan in the Cordillera Blanca. So we've chosen 2 sites. One is high elevation for the long history. We go back in time. And then we've chosen Pulcahirca, which is at about 5,300 meters, where we believe we'll have an annual resolution covering at least the last 1,000 years, so that you can look at the individual precipitations here, and then we'll compare that to what we find in New Guinea on the other side of the Pacific Ocean.
Do you have an idea of what you'll find? What's your hypothesis on this?
I think that there's a lot of unknowns here. No one has ever drilled in New Guinea. 30 years this place has been closed, and we've worked our way through the ice fields in New Guinea set on top of the world's largest gold mine. And so there has been no access for 30 years, but those glaciers are all disappearing, just like the ones here in the Andes. So our goal is to capture whatever that record is before those glaciers disappear. Within 30 years, there'll be no glaciers in New Guinea, and there's only this one mountain in the center of the warm pool that has glaciers on it. So in some ways, it's kind of a salvage mission. We'll take what the glacier offers and then compare that with what we find here in the Andes.
You've been drilling all over the world. You have, I assume in Columbus, Ohio, you have a freezer full of ice cores.
We do.
Why do you save the ice cores?
We currently have 7,000 meters, and we've just put in a proposal to double the size of our storage facility because these records are disappearing. There's a history in the ice, I think the best written history we have of our past climate on the planet. That history will disappear, and it's already being compromised on many of these mountaintops. The idea is we drill the cores, we split them in half. Half of the core goes into the freezer because we know in 20 years from now, the technology, the young people, much brighter than we are, will be able to look at these cores and read them much better than we can. But the fact is the natural archive is going to disappear. And so part of it is preserving an archive, a frozen archive for the future. And we now have scientists who come from all over the world to come and sample from our archive. It's the only tropical archive on Earth. And so I think it's very important to preserve those for the future generations.
What kinds of things in the future do you think you might be able to learn from those?
Well, I think that...
What can't you find out now that you hope in the future you'll be able to?
Well, one of the things we know with technology is that every year you need less sample to make a measurement than you needed the previous year. As that technology improves our ability to measure things that we don't even know about now. In these cores, there are microorganisms. There's a history of microbes that are lived on the planet. They're frozen in the ice. And the beauty of ice is anything that it captures, it keeps. It preserves it, it's frozen, and you can extract that material, and you can actually resuscitate organisms that have been in the ice for 40, 50,000 years. And that technology, that science is just in the beginning phases. But if you can preserve the ice, then they will have access to that 20, 30 years from now. Organic geochemistry, looking at things that are emitted from fires, emitted from distant sources. In this part of the world, we have a nitrate record in these cores. Nitrates have 5 different sources. They come from lightning, they come from the Amazon rainforest, NOx emissions from the soils. They come from burning of fossil fuels. By looking at the isotopes of nitrate, you can actually source where did they come from. Where do they come from now? Where did they come from 1,000 years ago? And we're just now developing that technology, our ability to actually look at that. Another thing is that if you're looking at like the 5,200 year event, big question is what caused it? What is the source of that? Well, you can take the ice and you can look at the dust that was deposited 5,200 years ago, and that dust is exactly the same composition as it was when it fell 5,000 years ago because it's frozen in ice.